Let me give you another example of prototyping. This time a prototype meant to address technology uncertainty, which, as you may remember, is the question, can we build it? This example comes from the Google Glass. So the Google Glass is a virtual reality headset. In other words, it's a pair of glasses you can wear that projects a virtual reality onto your physical world. Now, the story behind this Google Glass is quite interesting. I spent some time with Tom Chi, who is the inventor behind the Google Glass. And he told me about his experience. He said he was working at Yahoo and he got a call to join a new group at Google called Google X. And the goal of Google X was to advance technologies of the future today. And in his first meeting at Google X, he was in the meeting, Sergey Brin's in the meeting, some other Silicon Valley luminaries are in the meeting. They spend the first third of the meeting talking about which technology should we advance. And they quickly decide to focus on the Google Glass. But then they spend the next two-thirds of the meeting debating the most useless question, which is what color should the heads-up display in the Google Glass be? In other words, as you look through the Google Glass and it shows some augmented reality on your field of view, what color should that display be? Now, I bet if I didn't tell you anything else about that meeting, you already know in your heart who won that argument. Sergey Brin, because he's the co-founder of Google. He's what we call the highest paid opinion, or the hippo. And in big companies, the hippo almost always wins the argument. Now, fortunately for the Google Glass project, they didn't stop there. The next day, they started building. And they started building a working prototype of the Google Glass. Now, as they started building this working prototype, they were focusing on, we want to build a prototype that has, red heads-up display. And by the way, Sergey Brin, his reasons for building a red heads-up display were very scientific sounding. It sounded good. He said that we should make it red because red photons are the lowest energy photons, so it will be the easiest on your eyes. And, very scientific. And the second reason was that in science fiction movies, the heads-up displays are always red. So, another very scientific reason to make it red. But as I mentioned, the next day, Tom Chi and his team start actually building this. Now, ask yourself, how long would it take to make a working version of a heads-up display? I probably would have guessed 2 years, maybe 6 months if you were really good. What sets this team apart is they built a working version in 1 day. 1 day. Now, it wasn't beautiful. It was a very simple prototype. What they did is they essentially took a Pico projector, which is a very small projector, taped it to somebody's glasses like mine, hooked that projector up to a laptop. Then they took a wire shirt hanger, like you might get back from the dry cleaners. They unbent the wire hanger and then rebent it so that there was a loop that would hang around your neck, rest against your chest, and then it would extend from your chest out, and at the very end would be a binder clip holding a sheet of transparent plastic. And what that allowed you to do is very quickly, immediately, see what it's like to have an image projected onto your physical world. And you know what was so great about that very simple prototype? They discovered right away that red is actually the very worst color for a heads-up display, for precisely the reason that Sergey Brin said it was the best. And that's because you can't see those red low-energy photons when they are on a background of a room full of light. So they immediately pivoted. They learned right away and began to change. The next day, they came back and they said, well, how do you control this thing? And many of you may have seen the movie with Tom Cruise called Minority Report, and he's moving around data with his hands, and it's so exciting. And I think everybody after that movie wanted to move data around with their hands, right? And so the Google Glass team says, well, we want to do that too. And so they prototyped it. How long would it take to prototype that kind of motion? Well, they did it in 45 minutes. Now, how did they do that? Well, it was very simple. They borrowed a hairband from somebody who had long hair, put it around their wrist, tied that with a piece of fishing line, that went up and over like a Post-it note easel down to the ground. And on the ground, you had a very simple contraption, which was a chopstick. And the chopstick had the string on one end and a binder clip in the middle, and then a slide advancer, so that when you pulled with one hand like this, it would tighten the string and click the slide advancer. Just like that. It's very simple, very minimum. But what it did is it allowed them to learn. And they learned two things right away. The first is that if you're walking down the street like this, sure, it looked cool in the movie, but in real life, people think you're crazy. That's probably not the best way to control the device. People will be crossing to the other side of the street. But the second thing they learned is when your hands are above your heart for any amount of time, your arms actually start to get really tired. And so they began to explore other avenues. Now, they did something like, or built something like 150 prototypes in 10 weeks. I mean, just an immense amount of prototypes. And in the entire period, they made many changes or pivots. Because when you're under uncertainty, it's not about guessing the right path from the beginning. It's about learning as quickly as possible and then changing. And they made sure that they learned from every failure they had. So I remember talking to Tom and him telling me that one week, one of the engineers came to him and said, Tom, I built 5 prototypes this week, but only one of them was any good. Can I just bring the one that works to the meeting? Tom said, no, of course not. You have to bring the ones that failed, and you have to tell us why they failed. We have to learn from our failure. So, whether you're facing demand uncertainty or technical uncertainty, there's a way to move faster than you could imagine and start to learn today and discover where you might be wrong, because you always will under conditions of uncertainty, and pivot.